was telling it that I wanted to go live. The joys of technology, but it works, it helps. As soon as it finishes connecting. Oh, don't need to hear an echo of myself. And let's make sure. Oh, it has not done that. So I've got to click that button over there. Just wait a few minutes. All right. Now it is properly set up. All right. Let's get back to my other view. Good to see everyone. So nice to have you log back in. I always have a little bit of a nail biter, wondering when I come back from vacation how many people will remember when we're starting up again. But it's nice to see the usual crew, and I'm sure that we're going to enjoy our study. And for those of you joining through YouTube, as a reminder, there is a small lag, which means that you'll be getting it a little bit somewhere between 30 and 45 seconds after I'm actually saying it, which means if you have a question and you type it in the chat, there will be a delay until I switch back over to that window to double check and all of that. So I'm not ignoring you. I just haven't noticed. Of course, you are welcome to join me on the Zoom. If you need that link, just send me an email, rabbi@tiflorida.org, and I'll be more than happy to give you the link to help you get on the Zoom where you can ask questions immediately. And that is a reminder for our Zoom crew. Feel free to unmute, to raise your hand, or put questions or comments in the chat. Okay. Now that we've covered all of the routine things, let's get down to our work. We are picking up in Parashat Pinchas. This is Numbers 26, will be our first section of this parasha. And Pinchas is famous for two main things, neither of which we are going to be talking about. Pinchas is famous for containing the special listing of the different korbanot, the different sacrifices offered for the different occasions in the Jewish timeline. That is to say, the Jewish calendar, daily, monthly, Shabbat, holidays, all of those kinds of things. Wonderful and nice. We've looked at it before, not today. The other thing Pinchas is known for is, well, for Pinchas's namesake, for the deed that Pinchas had done and his reward or recognition is probably the better word at the beginning of this parasha. We're going to be looking at something that's in between. And it's the part that is, well, boring in the eyes of most. And as always, you know me, that if there's a part of the Torah that people find boring, I have to find something in it to make them realize it's not. And this is the census. Now, I will admit that it takes much more time and much more digging than I think we're going to do today to look at each number of the census and find the significance of it. But in totality and in context, as we're going to see here, beginning with verse 52, the underlying theme and reason and implications of the census are incredibly profound. So let's just make sure we understand why we have a census in the first place. As you may remember, all the way back in Ki Tisa, Judaism is not a big fan of doing censuses. Counting people like counting objects is considered dehumanizing, objectifying, and really not good. In the ancient world, kings would often want to count their numbers of people because they were trying to show how amazing they were for having such a population subservient to them. Judaism is not like that, even though our king is a good king, meaning God. We still do not like that idea. However, sometimes you do need to know how many people are around. One of those times is when you are putting together your military. You can't go to war if you don't know how many soldiers you have, because it's not going to turn out well. So we need to count the number of men that are suitable for battle. And that's the bulk of what this section of the Torah is doing. However, there is another purpose, which is going to be talked about here, beginning with verse 52, and that has to do with the long-term implications of settling the land of Israel. So let's begin with the text, and then we will see what those implications are. And Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, "To these shall the land be portioned out as an inheritance, by the enumerated names." All right, so enumerated names by the number of names is another way of putting it. is talking about the names of all the people that were mentioned in the previous text of the Torah. Like I said, you're welcome to go back and look at the rest of the census here, but as you will notice, there are specific names for the different sub-clans of each of the tribes. So it's not just the tribe of Naphtali, it's the tribe of Naphtali, clan A, clan B, clan C, and so forth. So that's what we mean by the enumerated names. And those are not just enumerated as in listed, but they are actually numbered as in we are getting a sense of how many different clans are in each of the different tribes. Now, verse 54 then points out why we want to know this. To the many, you are to give much as their inheritance. To the few, you are to give little as their inheritance. Each one, according to its count, is to be given its inheritance. All right. As usual, pshat, and a very simplistic, really superficial reading, verse 54 seems to be telling us that when we are coming to the land of Israel and we have to get the nachala, the portion that will be inherited, the peace, if you will. That's not peace like shalom. That's peace like a piece of pie. That's going to be divvied up. That those that have more should get more, and those that have less should get less. Now, that seems on a superficial read-through perfectly fine, right? If somebody needs more because they've got more people, then they should get more of the land of Israel. However, there is an underlying tension there about fairness that we are going to need to scratch our head about. Superficially, and we're going to go deeper than this, but superficially, when we are looking at the inheritance issue, we have to ask, well, if I were a person about to pass from this world, and I had 3 children, and one of those children had 10 kids, and one of those children had 100 kids, and one of those children had no kids, should I divide my inheritance to them based upon the number of my children, 3, or based upon the number of grandchildren proportional to each one of my children? Now, generally, in Judaism, we apportion it only according to the next generation, meaning that if I have 3 kids, even if one of them has no kids and one of them has 100 kids, each of the kids would get an equal portion of what my inheritance was, and then they, in turn, would divide what they have at the end of their life equally among all of their children, whatever that number might happen to be. There is special allotment for the double portion given to the eldest, but that's another conversation for another time. But we don't pick and choose, and we don't apportion based upon the need of those children. We divide it equally in all routine circumstances. There are some complications sometimes, but we're not going to get into them today. So this seems to be saying the opposite. We just counted up the tribes, and we've counted how many are in each tribe. We've counted how many clans are in each tribe. And verse 54 seems to be indicating that the inheritance that gets handed out of the land of Israel, the division of that piece of pie, Torah. However, verse 55 comes along, smacks us in the head and says, maybe not. However, by lot, the land is to be apportioned. By listed names of their ancestral tribes, they are to inherit it. Okay, wait. We just said that we're going to give a lot to those with a lot and a little to those with a little, but if we're doing this by random lottery, then that doesn't work. If I put my inheritance into a bag and ask my kids to draw it out at random, that's not going to guarantee that the one with a lot gets a lot and the one with a little gets a little. That could be completely opposite. The whole point of having a lottery, this goral, is in order to make it random, in order to remove decision-making from the person who's making the decision. And of course, in context, it also seems to imply that the decision is going to be made not by our counting and assessment of each tribe, but by God's assessment of each tribe, because even if we, at least not without cheating, can't arrange the lottery to give it in the right way, God can. So what's going on? Are we meant to divide it up based upon what we think is the potential based on the numbers of each tribe, or are we letting this go by God's hands? And as I mentioned, verse 55 seems to be putting in the second hide. By the listed names of their ancestral tribes, they are to inherit it. So it is still going by clan, not by individual. And 56 rounds it out. By means of the lot of this inheritance, by means of the lot, it is inheritance to be apportioned between the many and the few. And so 56 doesn't forget what we said back up in 54 about the little getting a little and the lot in the big getting a lot. But it is telling us that that's going to be happening by lottery, not by our assessment. But we were given as a command, as a statement, right, that we will give those who have a lot more. So which is it? Are we giving more based upon our assessment of the tribes and their clans, or are we going to just expect that the lottery works out so that the ones who have more get more and the ones with little get little, but we're not actually in the decision-making process? How do we reconcile these three different verses that are talking about the importance of the allotment of the land of Israel? And as you can imagine, at the time, this would have been of critical importance. You have just finished your 40-year ordeal in the wilderness of Sinai. You were about to enter the land of Israel, for which you will have to fight and struggle. You need to have confidence that at the end of that struggle, you will have something fair for yourself and your family. That you're not fighting just so the tribe of Judah can get rich, and the tribe of Judah is not fighting just so the tribe of Benjamin can get rich, but that all of us will have a fair share of the gift that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because all of us at this stage in the game are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are their heirs, and therefore we have been promised a fair share of that land. So the fact that this seems superficially a little confusing should give us pause and should make us look in our commentary and say, what's going on here? Because if it's a little confusing to us, it would have been infuriating to the people at the time. Spoiler alert, it works out fine, but we have to go through the process of seeing how that happens. But before we dive into that process, are there any questions or comments before we look into our commentary? Okay, not seeing anyone. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so we're going to begin with Bamidbar Rabbah. This is one of the great Midrashic collections for the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And it picks up, not surprisingly, on our verse. To these the land shall be distributed according to the number of names. Our starting verse, basically. Who were they? That is to say, which names are we talking about? Because you might think that, we're talking about the people just mentioned in the census right above it. I mean, that kind of makes sense. But there is a reason why we might not be thinking about those people. Now, the Midrash tells us it was, in fact, the people standing on the plains of Moab. And that means the people right now, right there at the end of the 40 years, that census is the one that we are taking into account. However, but was the land not divided to those who departed from Egypt, as it is written all the way back in Exodus? I will give it to you as a heritage. Why did he, meaning God, not divide it among them? All right, so here is the fundamental question that Bamidbar Rabbah is trying to wrestle with. Is, yes, superficially from context, it's obvious that we are going to apportion the land by the number of the people that are there at the end of the 40 years. But if you had a good memory and went back and looked in Exodus 6, you would see that God had promised that generation, the previous generation, the generation that departed from the land of Egypt, that God had promised that generation to give the land as a heritage. So why shouldn't the land be divided based upon them? Now, you might be thinking, well, what difference does it make? It's only been 40 years. Well, as we're going to see throughout our commentary, it could make a very big difference. And if you're not sure that a big difference in the apportionment of property might be a cause of alarm or upset within families, I don't think you've been paying attention to families since the beginning of time. People will fight and argue about property, often to their own detriment, and it would not be surprising. So let's see what might be the case. It is because it was foreseen before the Holy One that ultimately families are destined to be eliminated from them. Meaning that from the group that left Egypt, Exodus 6 group, who got that first statement of promise, that we can't count based upon that count, meaning the first count of the Israelites, because some of those at the very first count aren't going to make it. They're not going to be there at the end of the 40 years. And not just the individuals, because obviously we know that anyone over the age of 20 is not going to make it to the land of Israel at all, except for Joshua and Caleb. But because their families, some of the clans, will disappear. How do we know this? Who were they, the ones that were eliminated? And don't take it quite so pejoratively. Well, those who are written above, meaning in the earlier section of the accounting of the tribes of Jacob, the grandchildren of Jacob that came down with him to Egypt, the sons of Simeon, Yemuel and Yamim and Ohad and Yachin and Zohar and Shaul, the son of the Canaanite woman, right? There were 6 of them. But when you read in Numbers 26:12, that is to say, the count that we would have just finished in this chapter, one of them is missing. There are only 5 that are listed as being from the clans of Simeon. Likewise, with regarding Benjamin, meaning the tribe of Benjamin, in Genesis, we see Bela and Becher and Ashbel and Gera and Naaman and Echi, Rosh, Mupin, Hupin, and Ard. And that's 10 of those clans based off of Benjamin. But when you come to count them in the book of Numbers, in our chapter, 5 of the sons are missing. So if we had apportioned the land based upon the number of clans that were found in each tribe from their initial exodus, then by the time we got to the land of Israel, there would be some missing. And then who gets their land? Does that get reabsorbed through the inheritance chain by uncles and going back up the line until you find another relative that it can be transferred across? Far simpler to simply say, we're going to apportion it based upon those who are actually here at the threshold of the land. That will be our counting. Now, again, I'm just going to insert this here. It's not in the Midrash, but you might be also wondering, well, why not just do the apportionment at the end? Like, aren't we counting chickens before they're hatched here? Why not wait until after the land has been settled and conquered before doing the apportionment? Well, that would be rather terrifying. After all, when you're going off the battle, there's a very good chance that you and perhaps even your entire family kin group might be wiped out in a battle, especially because people fought in tribal ranks. And if that was the case, then your family, your children left at home perhaps, or if you had no children yet, your wives would get nothing. And so you needed to know that you had earned a spot in the land, even if something went wrong and you were not going to be able there to take it. So doing this now before the war began was essential in order to have the proper focus and motivation and assurance to the soldiers. But it also waited till the last minute because even during the wilderness period, tribes, sub-tribes, the clans were coming and going. Now, so when you come, the 5 of them are missing, right? So these are 6 families because of the harlotry at the Council of Bilam. This is a reference to the very end of last week's Torah portion that led to Pinchas and his zealotry, which we're not going to go into, but basically pointing out that these 6 families all disappeared just in the last few seconds. So it wouldn't be surprising that it was done because of what happened in that moment. That is why the Holy One, blessed be he, said, "Why should I distribute the land to people who are destined to die?" When they came to the plains of Moab and stood in their entirety, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, "To these people, the land shall be distributed." All right. Now, before we get back into our discussion about the allotment of the land, because we're not done with it yet, we may have resolved that we are dividing it according to the numbers of the people at the edge of the land of Israel, but we haven't still decided how we're giving some to many or little to less, and what the lottery is doing. But there is another topic here that that bears a little examination. It is something that is difficult to wrap our head around, but is rather important. So I'm just going to give it as a little bit of a footnote or an aside. If you can't quite grasp it completely, or you have more questions about it, that's fine. We can talk later. But it's not essential for the rest of our discussion. But it is essential for the underlying question of, why would I distribute the land to the people who are destined to die? Is God making choices in the past that are contingent upon the actions of the future? Because that seems to be punishing people for things they haven't done, or perhaps rewarding people for things they haven't done. And whether or not God does that is a rather important moral and spiritual question, because it seems to be at odds with questions of free will. It seems to be at odds with questions of justice. So let's take a look at a couple examples where this seems to be taking place, and we'll talk about it in that context. So the first is one that is very important, as high holidays are coming up soon. One of the readings that are taken for Rosh Hashanah. It's the story of Hagar and Ishmael, remembering that Hagar was the second wife to Avraham, and her son Ishmael was his firstborn, but not from his beloved Sarah. And when Sarah had Isaac, she was alarmed at the way that Ishmael was playing, in quotes, with Yitzhak. Whole nother conversation there. And she demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away, and Hagar and Ishmael go, and they are on the point of death. At that point, they are crying, and God heard the voice of the lad, meaning Ishmael. The angel of God called to Hagar, his mother, from the heavens, and said to her, "What is it with you, Hagar?" Meaning, what is the issue? Because fear not, as God has heard the voice of the lad as he is there. All right, so it's in context, again, superficially. It's meaning, look, the young man is crying. God has heard him from where he is, because Hagar had left Ishmael some distance so that she didn't have to watch him die. So in context, it simply seems to be saying God heard Ishmael over there. However, Midrash doesn't rest at just superficial. Instead, the angel of God called to Hagar from the heavens. Why? Well, due to the merit of Avraham, meaning that we shouldn't think that Hagar herself was worthy of this intervention, but Avraham and thus his child were. And thus the angel is doing this. And he is saying, as he is there, but we are also saying that maybe the child had a right to be heard by God. Why? Due to his own merit, because after all, the prayer of an ill person himself is superior to all others. That because the child is calling out, of course, God is going to hear that. God hears the cry of anybody that is ill, of anyone that is in distress. Crying out to God will be answered regardless of the merits that you may or may not think you have. God is there for all of us in those moments. Now, the part that we are going to focus on, as he is there. Rabbi Shimon said, the ministering angels leapt to condemn him before God, meaning, as they often do, the rabbis imagined a heavenly court scene, and God is turning his attention towards Ishmael, and the other angels are like, God, don't help him. They said before him, Master of the universe, a person who is destined to kill your children by thirst, will you produce a spring for him? They're like, God, we know in the future, Ishmael's descendants will be terrible towards the Israelites. So how can you help Ishmael now? I mean, that's you're just setting up the whole problem. And God says back to them, what is he right now? Meaning, as he is there, what is he? Righteous or wicked? They said to him, he is righteous, meaning at that moment, Ishmael was not a terrible person. He was not a sinner. He was not somebody prone to causing enough problems that he was worthy of simply being ignored by God and left to die. Therefore, God says, he said to them, I judge a person only at his present time. So whatever may come in the future, both for Ishmael and his descendants, at the moment, this young man is not worthy of being executed, and therefore, indeed, I will make sure that he is able to survive. So here we have both knowledge of the future, but it is not being included in our understanding of justice. Instead, it is only the actions of the present that are needed for our fulfillment of our cause for justice. Contrary to this, however, we see in Shemot Rabbah, the midrash that's on the book of Exodus. And here we are dealing with the incident where the young Moshe, well, young, he was 40 years old, goes out into the land of Egypt, and he sees the harsh treatment of the Israelite slaves, and he steps in to try and stop one of the Egyptians from further harming one of the slaves. And in that context, it is said, he, meaning Moses, turned this way and that, and saw that there was no man, and he smote the Egyptian. So, again, superficially, he might have been looking around for witnesses, but Midrash is not going to rely on only superficial readings. Instead, the rabbi said, he saw that there was no expectation that righteous people would emerge from him or from his descendants until the end of all the generations. So, Moshe looks into the future. He looks left and right across the family tree that would come from this man that he is about to strike, and he sees that no one that comes from this guy is ever going to be a good person. They are rotten all the way down the tree. Thus, killing him is fine because, there's nothing good that's ever going to come from him. So cutting this branch off of the tree now, stopping the rot where it is, seems like a good idea. However, Moses saw this. He consulted with the angels and said to them, is this one liable for execution? They said, yes. That is what is written. He saw that there was no man, not necessarily just that there would be no descendants from him, but more there was no one who would speak in his favor. So what we have here is another attempt to use the future to try and determine justice in the present. And you can see that the rabbis are both supportive of the notion that Moses would never have killed a person that had a chance for redemption, that had a chance for tshuva, or at the very least would have had descendants who could have done tshuva and become better people. And the rabbis want to make sure that we don't think that Moses was bloodthirsty and ignorant of those concerns. And so we are discounting all of the descendants as being equally problematic. Obviously, the rest of us lacking that future sight would be well advised not to think we get to make that call either. Likewise, they say that it wouldn't have been right for Moses to have judged on his own for what he was about to do. And so he consulted the heavenly court, and they too agreed that this person was deserving of death and that there were no reasons to stay his hand. There was no one willing to speak up for him. So both of these texts, in their own way, seem to be indicating that there is knowledge of the future, and yet, even with that knowledge, oftentimes we are left having to deal only with the present. In the first one, we are dealing only with the young Ishmael and that he is not worthy of death at this moment, and thus he will be saved. And in the second one, even though we know that there is no future from this person, it's only in the exceptional case of Moses's prophetic view that he was able to make that determination. That in general, as a human, we cannot expect that we will know the full outcome of a person's family tree or any other part of their life to be able to use our estimate of their future, our prediction of their possible crimes or merits as a way of influencing our decision of justice at the moment. That it was only with these extraordinary insight of Moses and the extraordinary support of the angelic court that Moses was okay with what he did at that moment. So the future is certainly known, but it is not usually admissible in court except under very special circumstances, in this case, if you happen to be Moses. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, because a lot of people really do seem to like to imagine that they can predict the future and that by predicting it, they can now treat somebody at the moment in a way that is inappropriate, either by giving them a harsher treatment because they imagine of where they're headed, or sometimes also to their own trouble, giving somebody who deserves to be treated with a stronger measure of justice too much latitude because they imagine that they will, quote, get better eventually. I can fix them, I can help them, and so I don't need to be as focused on justice at the moment. And while there is always mercy for those that are contrite, oftentimes it is given out in ways that doesn't help contrition, but sometimes helps recidivism. Okay, so it is not easy, which is why we focus on the present for trying to figure these things out, which brings us back to our question of fairness when it comes to the allotment of the land of Israel, the land of Israel, yes. So how do we make this fair? Are we going to be really doing like our first comment from Bamidbar Rabbah, where we are saying that God was predicting that there would be some loss of those tribes for bad reasons, and that thus he waited to make the apportionment? Well, exactly how much of the future are we going to consider? Is it the next 40 years? Is it the next 400 years? At what point do we say, look, we have to actually allocate the land regardless of what comes next? And Or HaChaim is going to sort of spell out what that issue is. So furthermore, this is a continuation of his discussion. If Rabbi Yonatan included only people who were counted, meaning that they had reached the age of 20 at the time of the census, because remember, the census was originally taken as part of a military census, which means you had to be 20 to serve, then the following situation could arise. That is to say, if we're only counting people of that age and higher, suppose a father had 10 sons, each above the age of 20 at this time, and another father had 8 sons, 4 of whom were above the age of 20, the other 4 being younger. All right, so one's got 10 kids, one's got 8 kids. One of them has 10 that make the cutoff, one of them only has 4 that make the cutoff. We're doing the apportionment of the land at this moment, and we're only doing it based off the number of children that are of the military age, then the first father is going to end up with allocations for his children equaling 10 portions. And the second father will end up with allocations for his children equaling 4 portions, because 4 of them are not yet of age. However, by the time they all entered the Holy Land, the first father had lost 4 of his sons because they had died, whereas the other father's son by then had all reached the age of 20. So just allow a few years to go by, and that family count could shift radically. One of them could now have only 6 sons in total, and the other could now have 8 sons that are also over the age of 20. So that would mean that we'd had a bit of a irregularity in the distribution. So the last mentioned family would have received a larger share than the family which had 10 eligible sons at this time. So you would end up with the one at the end, the 8 family, ending up with a larger share than the 10 family because of the tragedy that some of them had passed away. To prevent such a mistake, in Rabbi Yonatan's eyes, from being made, the Torah wrote to the large increase. That is to say, that the determining criteria was the respective number of eligible sons a family comprised at the time the commandment was given, that is to say, at the time of the census. Any change in the status of the family between now and the actual time of distribution was to be disregarded. So, like I mentioned earlier, if we were to wait until after the wars had been fought and the land had been settled, then the numbers would be potentially very different. And that would be adding a greater tragedy, a greater insult on top of the tragedy of the death of those people who had fallen in order to secure a safe place that we could live peacefully. So the Or HaChaim is saying that Rabbi Yonatan says, look, we have to go by the number at the time of the actual prelude to the settling of the land. We can't wait until the actual distribution, or else we'd end up with an offensive situation like this. Now, for those of you that are saying, yes, but it's not offensive to the father of 8, because he gets 4 more portions by giving a few more years for his 4 younger children to age up. And that is true. But ultimately, we can never possibly wait long enough to satisfy every family of when their children will come of age. That the coming of age process is infinite. It is a constantly cyclical nature, as each day another person moves up into a new age. Whereas the perishing of somebody in war is a tragedy, and it's one that can be accounted for by actually setting a time where we actually will pick the numbers. Because at some point or another, you actually have to apportion the land. There will never be the perfect better time by just waiting another day, another year, another 20, another 500 years for the right time to apportion, because everything can change during that time period. And some people will always have an interest in waiting for it to change for the better on their side. And some people will always have an interest in waiting or preventing the time from going on because it's better for themselves now. So it must be done at a certain time. And to take it off our shoulders, God says, we're doing this right now. Rather than being our decision, it's God's decision. But notice that Or HaChaim is arguing that this line to the large increase is that what is essentially being said is that a bigger family will get a bigger share, even if they're not a bigger family by the time they actually are taking charge of their share. That this will be an increase that perhaps is no longer, quote, relevant based on the numbers at the time of distribution, but that should not alarm us. That is simply the impact of having distributed something at any point in time. And this was always going to be a contentious and difficult time. And yes, you would end up with the incongruities that we are examining here, and that's okay. We cannot always take into account everything that'll happen in the future that might cause this distribution to eventually, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 500 years, to look unequal. That it has to be equal, at least at the starting point, in a way that seems fair at that moment, even if the eventual circumstances might give rise to other feelings of unfairness. But of course, we have to remember that that is a fundamental principle of Judaism, is that we create a fairness of opportunity, we create an equality of beginning, and we also implement instruments to continue to try and support those that have had tragedies or difficulties or even their own bad decisions that have set them back from where they could have been. Meaning that if your farm gets wiped out by the flood and your neighbor's farm doesn't, that doesn't mean you get to take his farm. It doesn't mean he has to divide his farm equally with you, but it does mean that you should be able to expect tzedakah and tithing and the fallen sheaves and the corners of the fields and many of the other forms of support. And even if worse comes to worse and you have to sell your labor away from your own land, at the time of the Jubilee, it would be restored to you. So there were always systems to try and reestablish this original fairness that was being discussed here. But there was room in the middle for things to go wrong. And then there were things to be done for those that had things that had gone wrong. It is a very well-balanced and intricate design. Unfortunately, sometimes people focus only on one aspect, either trying to seek perfect equality at every moment, which is simply impossible, or by ignoring the inequality of outcomes because of the believed equality of a start position of the original state. And neither of those are, in their purity, a Jewish position. We don't seek for absolute equality. Everybody gets 1 shekel. We allow people to have more than others, but we do not allow anyone to have none. And we don't allow anyone to enrich themselves and in the abusive expense of anyone else. And we also want to ensure that there is always a chance for a person to begin again with a clean slate and have an opportunity to once again make for themselves what they wish. And no one should ever be captured in perpetual servitude. Okay. Continuing with this theme then of the distribution of the inheritance, we turn to Sifrei Bamidbar, one of the very earliest sections of halachic midrash. which often has much shorter statements, which means we have to have longer explanations. To the more numerous tribe, you shall increase its inheritance, and to the less numerous, you shall decrease its inheritance, our starting verse. If one had 5 sons when he left Egypt and 10 sons when he entered, to them I apply. To the numerous, you shall increase its inheritance. Likewise, if he had 10 sons when he left Egypt and 5 when he entered the land, I apply to them, and to the less, you shall decrease its inheritance. So here the Sifrei is trying to say that it's not so much a matter of prediction or of what will come next. It's that, yes, if you started off with only 5 and you've gone up to 10, then you have already increased, and thus your inheritance has increased at this point, but not further. You don't get to have a bigger inheritance when in 50 years you have 100 sons. So there is this moment of increase, and then after that, it stays as it was. And likewise, the opposite side, that if you started off with 10, but ended up with only 5 by the time we are here, then you have less and you will receive less because you have only 5 kids at this time. To a man, to exclude woman, tumtumim, hermaphrodites. So the property inheritance was passed down by patrilineal descent, meaning father, son, as all of the tribal affiliations were. That is why, for example, all of the tribes are considered to come from Jacob, even though he had 4 wives, because it is through him that we have our patrimony. And likewise, the question of Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac and Ishmael are both sons of Abraham, as well as Esau and Jacob are both sons of Isaac. So the tight affiliation for property goes according to the parent. That's why Ishmael and Esau both received their own portions, because they did deserve to inherit some from Abraham and Isaac respectively, although not the land of Israel in particular. Whereas other people, both women or people of different types of gender expression, and yes, that was known in the ancient world, they did not receive at this moment from that inheritance, although they do have ways to inherit and own land once this division has been taken care of, because they would not be following a patriarchal distribution of population. Onward, according to its numbers, we are hereby taught that Israel was apportioned each tribe according to its head count. Right? That's why we said the number. And thus it is written, we see this in the book of Joshua, and the children of Joseph said to Joshua, why have you given me a single allotment as an inheritance, when we are a great multitude whom the Lord has thus far blessed? Remember I told you, families will often argue about property, and in fact, we see that. Even with all of this setup, we see it happening in the book of Joshua. If the children of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, were the 2 huge tribes, and they thought they deserved more. And Joshua said to them, if you are a great multitude, go up to the forest country and clear an area for yourselves there in the land of the Perizi and the Rephaim, the mountain of Ephraim constricting you. So basically what he told them was, if you're so powerful because of your numbers, then go clear more land. That you're not getting more land just because you are more numerous now. The numbers were already established prior to the invasion of the land, and that's what we're sticking with. But you can certainly clear out more land, cut down some forests and make more farmland for yourselves. That's perfectly fine. But do not expect to take from your brothers, from their portion, just because you have more. And shall his inheritance be given? Now, there we get into a little back and forth. That is to say, I would understand this to mean indiscriminately. If you've got more, you get more, and we're just going to sort of hand it out. However, it is therefore written by allotment, by lottery, the goral. If by allotment, I would understand by themselves, that is to say, the people would just put together a lottery. It is therefore written by the word of the lottery, whereby we are apprised that Israel was apportioned by the Holy Spirit. Okay, so what this comes to tell us is that it's going to work out that the larger groups end up with more, but not at the expense of each other, and that the actual appointment of who gets what within the land is going to come at God's discretion, that there will be this Ruach HaKodesh that will establish who gets what in the land. So this seems, again, to bring us back to our conflicted zone. Are we counting, or are we going by our divine divination? What actually is happening here? We've just got a couple more comments that I hope will bring this to its conclusion. So let's look at Tanchuma, another one of the Midrash compilations, again talking about this lottery issue. This is what is stated in Proverbs. The lot, meaning drawing lots, a random selection, puts an end to strife. That is to say, the use of the lottery was given precisely because it would take the decision-making away from each other, which would mean we could not argue about the outcome. As long as we knew that we all had an equal chance of getting whatever it was, then when we get what we get, we won't get upset. At least that is the theory. Now, how do we know that this had to be done in a way that was divinely sanctioned? Well, since a sign was written for each and every tribe from Yaakov, like Zvulun will dwell on the shore of the seas, and Yissachar is a bony donkey, you are only permitted to divide by the lot. And there's already a reference for each one of them. It already feels like there is something that is in mind because of Jacob's prophetic description of each. So how am I going to override what was already planned? And there were miraculous acts in the lottery. Eleazar the priest wears the Urim and Tumim, the special stones that were part of the breastpiece, and I will cast the lot for you here in front of the Lord our God. But before the lot went up, Eleazar said with the Holy Spirit, the lot of tribe X is coming up to take place. So what basically is being imagined here is that the lottery was being prepared, but before the lottery was actually drawn, Eleazar would give a short prediction, a statement of God's will, of what that was about to be. So the lottery took place. That is to say, people were drawing it out of a hat, so to speak, or out of a jar. But as they were drawing it out, right before they drew it out, Eleazar told them what it would be, and then they looked, and lo and behold, and Joshua would extend his hand, and it would come up into his hand. As it is stated, these are the inheritance for Eleazar the priest and Joshua ben Nun a portion. So they each played a role. Eleazar was stating what God wanted each drawing to result in, and then Joshua would draw, and lo and behold, it would be what Eleazar had said God wanted each drawing to be. Okay, so this is the ultimate compromise system. The land of Israel has been apportioned. Just a bit more about that in the next section. And then the land apportionments are going to be distributed to the different tribes. And when that happens, it's going to be done by lottery. But to make sure that everybody knows that this lottery is not just blind luck, that it isn't just totally random, Eleazar is actually verbally giving a prophecy before each lot is drawn. But also to make sure that people don't think it is just Eleazar making it up or pretending to speak for the word of God. The lots are actually drawn. So we get this double verification, if you will, that in fact, this is the way the land is meant to be divided. This is to reduce and hopefully almost eliminate any potential arguments over the division. So the word goes out, the lottery is drawn, the word, the lot match, people can be resolved, the lot puts an end to the strife. Okay, but I mentioned about apportionment, and despite having to go on to page 3, I wanted to make sure that we could talk about this. This is Rashi's comment on our text. To the numerous tribes, they gave a large portion of land, although the portions were not of equal area, because as we have now said, in all cases, they assigned the portions to the size of the tribes, yet they did so only by aid of the lot, but the lot fell by the utterance of the Holy Spirit, as was just described. The land was not divided by measurement alone, because one district is superior to another, meaning better land, but was divided by estimating its fertility. A bad piece of land sufficient to sow a core was regarded as the equivalent of a good piece of land sufficient to sow a seah, which is the 30th part of a core, all dependent upon the value of the soil. So in the end, they ended up with a survey of the land that divided the land into apportionments that would be of the right size for the different tribes, but still also kept into account took into account the relative value of the land and its productivity, because that is what the land was for at that time, so that everyone who came out would have a proper equal share that had been ratified by both the lottery system as well as the divine utterance, so that the entirety of the nation of Israel would recognize that indeed, after this battle and struggle, the land was ours. We were all safe, secure, and an equal, just share of that land. You can see the lengths to which the Torah wanted to go to remind us that the land was meant to be a fair and shared inheritance, that there was among all of the people, not perpetual. Like I said, there could always be dips and curves, dips and what's the opposite? Hills and valleys, ups and downs. That's easier for the individual fortune of any person, family, or clan, but that ultimately the land would have been given fairly and would still have the safeguards that we discussed to make sure that even one who had hard times would never fall away from receiving the bounty, the blessing of the land that was part of their inheritance. Even if their particular portion had to be sold and alienated from them, they would still be enjoying the richness of the land through the support of others, and in due course, they would return to their portion as well. It really is a beautiful system that may not be in place at the moment, but is a strong reminder of our own obligation to pursue not only equality of opportunity, but to also ensure the safety and sharing of those that also struggle, that all of us are enjoying the bounty of God's great land, meaning the entire globe, and thus, even while we are given permission to enjoy the portion that we legitimately have in our own hands, we have to be sure that we are looking after others as well and trying to build them up so that they can enjoy the blessings of the world as well. All right, we will leave it there for today. Any questions? All right, hearing none, then we will go ahead and wrap up for today. A reminder for those of you that are in person that I do have my Anyone Can Pray class tonight. Those of you who normally join me on YouTube, I do live stream it, but of course it's better in person. And of course, the recording will go up in due course. Take care, everyone. Be well, and I will see you for our next study.